Have you ever watched yourself make the same mistake again, while knowing exactly where it was going to lead? Maybe you've put off an important decision, walked away from an opportunity, quit something that mattered to you, or somehow managed to get in your own way just when life finally seemed to be improving. I've done all of those things, and for years I couldn't understand why. I thought I lacked discipline. I thought I needed more motivation. But what I eventually discovered changed the way I looked at myself completely. I'm Pat, and today I want to share one of the most important lessons life has taught me about self-sabotage. For a long time, I thought my struggles came down to a lack of discipline. I'd start projects with enthusiasm and then lose momentum. I'd set goals and somehow drift away from them. I'd make progress and then, for reasons I couldn't explain, I'd find myself right back where I started. It was frustrating. And if you've ever felt like you're repeating the same mistakes over and over again, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. What eventually changed for me was realizing that self-sabotage is rarely logical. Most of the time, it's emotional. Think about it for a moment. How many times have you wanted something badly, and then found yourself doing the exact opposite of what would help you get it? Maybe you've spent weeks planning a project. You bought the books, watched the videos, made the schedule, and then somehow never got started. Or maybe you've met someone wonderful, but every time the relationship began getting serious, you pulled away emotionally. Maybe you've promised yourself that this would finally be the year you take care of your health, only to find yourself slipping back into the same habits a few weeks later. I've done versions of all those things myself. The strange part is that when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel like self-sabotage. It just feels normal. And that's where things get interesting. One lesson life has taught me is that human beings become familiar with certain emotional patterns. We get used to specific ways of feeling. Sometimes those feelings are positive, but sometimes they're not. Stress, worry, disappointment, fear, self-doubt. Even when we don't enjoy those feelings, they can become familiar. And familiarity has a powerful pull. But here's the part nobody ever explained to me. Sometimes the very thing you've been working toward can feel uncomfortable when it finally starts showing up. And if you don't understand why, you can end up pushing it away without even realizing it. That's exactly what happened to me. There were periods in my life when progress actually felt uncomfortable. I remember being offered an opportunity that would have required me to step into a much bigger role than I was comfortable with. At the time, I came up with all kinds of reasons not to do it. The timing wasn't right. I wasn't ready. Maybe later. Looking back, I realized those weren't really reasons. They were fears dressed up as reasons. You'd think success would always feel good, but that's not necessarily true. When things started improving, part of me almost wanted to retreat back to old habits, not because those habits were helping me, but because they were familiar. I understood them. I knew what to expect. The unknown felt riskier than the known, even when the known wasn't serving me very well. That realization changed how I viewed myself. Instead of constantly asking, what's wrong with me, I started asking, what pattern am I repeating? That's a much more useful question, because once you begin looking for patterns, you start seeing them everywhere. You start seeing patterns everywhere. In your reactions, in your self-talk, in the habits that quietly keep showing up, and most importantly, you begin separating your identity from your behavior. Just because you've repeated a pattern doesn't mean you are that pattern. That's an important distinction. Now, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm certainly not claiming to have all the answers. I'm simply sharing observations from my own life and from conversations I've had with countless people over the years. What I've found is that awareness often comes before change, not perfection, not motivation. Awareness. You can't change a pattern you can't see. But once you see it, everything starts to shift. You begin catching yourself sooner. Maybe you're halfway through talking yourself out of an opportunity when you suddenly recognize the pattern. Maybe you're about to postpone something important for the third day in a row, and you stop yourself. Maybe you're criticizing yourself the way you've done for years, and for the first time you notice what's happening. You start recognizing old habits before they take control. And that awareness gives you a chance to choose something different. And that's where real growth often begins. And this was the moment I stopped seeing myself as the problem. I started seeing the pattern as the problem. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back at a situation and realized you were unintentionally ruining something good in your life? Maybe it was an opportunity. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was a goal you genuinely cared about. And only later did you recognize the role your own fears or habits played in the outcome. I think most of us have experienced that at some point. The good news is that recognizing it isn't a reason for shame. It's actually a reason for hope. Because if patterns can be learned, they can also be changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but gradually. One decision at a time, one moment of awareness at a time, one new response at a time. If there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this video, it's this. Self-sabotage isn't always a lack of discipline. Sometimes it's your mind trying to protect you using strategies that made sense at one point in your life, but no longer serve you today. And the moment you begin noticing those patterns, you take the first step toward changing them. If you've enjoyed this conversation and you'd like more discussions about mindset, personal growth, and the lessons life teaches us along the way, consider subscribing. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. The patterns that hold you back are not who you are. They're simply patterns, and patterns can change. Just because you've lived with one for years doesn't mean you have to live with it forever. I'll see you in the next video.